So I am Maryam. I'm founder of the blog Pakistan Eats that I founded about 4 years ago. Um, I'd started the blog because I found that Pakistani food was really under documented online, and a couple of years into the blog, I realized Pakistani food culture was also under documented, and so I went ahead and started writing about food as well. So it's been a really interesting journey. I've been doing this for about 4 years now. And during the process, I've connected with so many wonderful culinary professionals and food writers from India as well. Today, I will be sharing a recipe with you as well as sharing some food stories from about Pakistan. I'm going to be making something really easy, something that's like a go-to in my home. It's chana pulao, which many of you may have eaten or may not have. I look forward to hearing your comments. The reason I picked this dish, I'll sort of go into it a little bit further down, but I feel like it's like a good mix of the kind of food I grew up eating and the kind of food cultures I was exposed to growing up. So, a little bit about my history and sort of where I come from. My both sides of my grandparents actually, so my mom's side, so my nana nani, and my dad's side dada dadi, they all migrated from Eastern Punjab. Delhi is a city that's actually very close to my grandparents' hearts. They're since deceased, but my Nana was a civil servant before partition, so he was posted in Delhi. So he spent a few years there, as well as some of my older aunts. And then both my Dada Dadi actually were studying in Delhi. They were at Sir Syed College during the time of partition. So it's actually they vividly recall how, my Dadi vividly recalls how when her family in a state of panic decided that she needed to move. It was just her older brother that had to come and pick her from Sir Syed College in Delhi and take her to the train station. From where she didn't know where her parents were, she didn't know where the rest of her family were. She was just with her older brother, and they sort of landed in Lahore. Luckily, they were able to safely reunite with their whole family, but I know that many on both sides of the border were not so fortunate. But that said, Delhi is a city that is so close to my family's heart, and I really hope I can visit soon and get to know a city that holds so much meaning in my family. My dada came from Jalandhar, Punjab. My dadi came from Panipat, and then my nana and nani came from Ludhiana, Punjab. And so from there, eventually through like a circuitous way, they found their way to the Rawalpindi, Islamabad region of Pakistan. That's the city that I grew up in. That's the city I'm called home. I know it's not the best food city in Pakistan, but it's the city that's closest to me. So I'll tell you a little bit about the food stories from the Islamabad and Rawalpindi areas. Since starting the blog and since writing about food, I have renewed appreciation for it. Obviously, growing up in Islamabad, it lacks the culinary diversity and richness that Peshawar, Lahore, and Karachi have. But at the same time, like it has like a really, especially like recently, it's becoming a cosmopolitan area. And I'll sort of go into some of the history behind Rawalpindi and Islamabad and why I decided to choose chana pulao. Um, so what's interesting about that particular region is specifically is Rawalpindi. Some of you, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it's typically known as the garrison city. It's housed the barracks, the army from the British time all the way to current time. So it houses the army's general headquarters. So it's definitely known as a military town, but there's so much more to that town's history. Rawalpindi was actually an incredibly religiously diverse city. And you can get a glimpse of that through one of my favorite neighborhoods in the city, which is Bhabra Bazaar. So Bhabra Bazaar was historically a Jain neighborhood, and but it also housed the Haveli of one of the most prominent Sikh businessmen, Sujan Singh's Haveli, which is like a big draw for architecture and history enthusiasts. So even though now that the neighborhood is all Muslim, you can see traces of the sort of the multi-religious history while you're walking through those narrow streets. So even though it was religiously diverse, after partition, what happened was that you got a lot of migrants from Delhi, and like my Nana Nani from Ludhiana, Punjab. So you have a so the culinary landscape of that neighborhood sort of is heavily inspired and derived from Delhi food culture and Eastern Punjab food culture at large. And so when you're sort of walking through the streets, you'll find like trees like undersay. I don't know how many of you have had them, but they're very popular in shrines. I never actually had them till very recently. I was doing a story on Bhabra Bazaar for Food 52, and they're delightful. They're these like deep. These are rice flour deep fried balls that are coated in sesame seeds or til. You'll have kheer walas that are will be selling freshly made kheer. You'll have naan khatai that's going to be served right out of the ankiti. So it definitely takes you back in time, and it's a glimpse of that history of that region, that particular Potohar plateau that I didn't really get exposed to growing up in Islamabad. Islamabad was is some of you may be aware of. It's a very new city. It's actually was formed during the 1960s. Originally, the capital of Pakistan was Karachi, but during General or President Ayub Khan, it was moved to Islamabad because it was seen as a more secure location, because it's like nestled inside these beautiful green hills. It's very close to Rawalpindi, which is like the army headquarters. And so yeah, it's definitely it was a jungle before it became this very clean, streamlined, modern city. Many of my Indian friends tell me that Chandigarh reminds them a lot of Islamabad. So I think, one of the few planned cities in the subcontinent. And so, sort of going back to my original point, because Islamabad is a new city, it doesn't have a really deep food culture. It's sort of in the process of sort of finding its culinary voice. And I think a big part of it, of course, it borrows heavily from Rawalpindi's culinary heritage. But what's been interesting, sort of like now that I've started to track its sort of culinary journey, is that, and that's why I decided to pick Chana Pulao, is that there's been a huge Pashtun influence on both Islamabad and Rawalpindi. Some of you may be aware that there's the northwestern frontier province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So Potohar Plateau, where Rawalpindi and Islamabad sit, it sort of borders. It sort of borders south of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And we all know that Pashtun culture, like basically, actually not just Pashtun culture, because Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province is also a very diverse province that holds a lot of different ethnicity. But yes, the dominant ethnicities are Pathans or Pashtuns. And so a lot of them migrated. There was like different waves of sort of internal migration that happened within Pakistan. So I just realized that we should start cooking as well. I can chat about this for a while. So let me get started, and while the onions are sort of simmering and I've added the spices, I'll sort of continue the story. So we're going to start by heating some oil and adding caramelizing onions to start off the base of the pulao. So the onions are going to simmer for about 10 to about, we're going to try to quick speed this up a little bit. So they're going to simmer for about 10 minutes, and then I can continue my talk. So bear with me. But I'm just heating some oil, and I'm going to add about, like one medium-sized white onion. There you go. So I've cut them in half rings. Yeah, and we're gonna like let it simmer for about 10 minutes, and you want them to brown nicely. So we're gonna let them simmer on low heat for a bit. So pulao is actually a dish that is very close to my heart. Normally, my family makes a lot of different variations of it. So it includes the chana pulao, includes matar pulao, and of course mutton pulao. The mutton pulao was like a staple growing up, particularly in my dadi's house, was from Panipat. And so it's interesting to see the different variations of pulao. But with Panipat, it's known to be a very light pulao. Even this one, we'll see it's very lightly spiced. And so going back to Islamabad's culinary journey and how it's evolved and becoming a more interesting food city was because of sort of this internal migration that started happening from the frontier province. The first wave happened during the 1960s. So when Islamabad was created, there was a lot more jobs. And so there was like that was like the sort of the first wave. During the 1980s, and there was also a lot of Afghan refugees that came sort of during the Taliban, we can go do a little side tangent of the war in Afghanistan. But yes, during the late 1980s, early 90s, there was a huge wave of Afghan migrants, refugees that came into Islamabad, Rawalpindi area as well. And with them, they brought their very amazing food culture. Um, and so that's probably one of my favorite aspects of Islamabadi food culture is just sort of the wonderful influence of Afghan food, which unfortunately is dying down because a lot of the Afghan refugees are being repatriated. They're being made to go back, even though Afghanistan is still very insecure. The second wave of internal migration from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is separate from Afghanistan, was during the sort of militancy, the insurgency that started happening around 2008. So I don't know if you were following the news around that time. Pakistan was going through a period of heightened insecurity. There was a lot of militant groups. There was a lot of lives lost. It was a very difficult time. I was in college at the time, and I graduated and I moved to Islamabad to work. This was during General Musharraf's years. And there was a bomb blast right next to my house. I could hear gunfire because there was the Lal Masjid siege happening. And so while these occasional incidents would happen in Islamabad, there's also the Marriott bombing, which was also very frightening. But while these occasional incidents were happening, huge parts of the frontier province were just highly insecure. And so there was a wave of internal migrants that came. And with them, they brought their food culture. What I love about Chana Pulao, speaking of their food culture, is that I feel like it kind of speaks to my family's culinary heritage. Like I said, I grew up having a lot of pulao, not biryani. We didn't really grow up eating biryani at all. It was just something we would have at weddings. And the fact that it's pulao is also enjoyed in the frontier province. So me and my friends joke a lot about while people in Pakistan love to talk about nihari, heavy meat dishes. Really, I would say pulao is probably our national dish because it's a dish that's enjoyed equally in all regions and provinces of Pakistan. So it's enjoyed in Sindh, even though Sindhi biryani is famous. People argue that actually Sindhi pulao is what came first. It's enjoyed in different variations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, so chana pulao is a very common one. And of course, there's Kabuli pulao, which is also very popular. And there's variations of Kabuli pulao that are found in the tribal areas as well. And then, of course, there's the pulao that I sort of grew up having at home, which is either, chicken pulao, which is made with like a rich broth, or mutton pulao. So that's kind of some of why I was really, really drawn to sort of making this dish. Let's go and check. I'm going to go ahead and check on the onions really quick. So like that part, I think that sort of that's what I think Islamabad and Rawalpindi's food culture is becoming, is more interesting than people give it credit to, is because it sits at this very interesting intersection of Pashtun and Punjabi food culture. And so that's kind of like the food that I sort of remember eating. And even now when I go to, some of the favorite things that I like going to eat out are Shinwari tikka. So Shinwari is like a tribe that is from the tribal areas in Pakistan. It's sort of like a traders community. And they were already a major merchant class, so they were responsible for opening a lot of the restaurants, particularly at the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There's like a lot of economic activity that happens. So they own most of the restaurants, and they make really like quick, easy, and delicious like salted tikkas with lamb. And when this insurgency started happening, a lot of them did move down to Islamabad and Rawalpindi. And so there's been an explosion of Shinwari restaurants across the country. And the Shinwari food has actually made it all the way down to Karachi as well, where, like 5 years ago, you wouldn't see Shinwari restaurants. No, but now they're all over the place. So yes, like obviously frontier barbecue is very, very popular in Islamabad and around the rest of Pakistan. And that way, Afghan food is also interesting because it's there's like a few institutional restaurants. Like Kabul restaurant is my favorite restaurant in Islamabad, and sorry, I just saw this really cool comment, which was Sujan Singh Haveli was my brother-in-law's family Haveli, which we visited in 2007. That's awesome. I think it's a beautiful Haveli. It's very dilapidated now, which is a little depressing if they had sort of taken action to preserve it. But you can get like a great glimpse of you can definitely get a glimpse of how amazing it must have been. We try to go inside, but unfortunately, I think you have to like arrange for it in advance, which we didn't. But now I think next time I go to Pakistan, I'm definitely going to try visiting it again. Um, I trying to think if I have photos of it posted on my Instagram. I don't think so, but I think this may have inspired me to put some up. It's really cool. I love Barbara Bazaar. I just think it's a really fascinating neighborhood. So I was sort of talking about Afghan food. I think so. Kabul restaurant is my favorite restaurant in the city, and while yes, there's a huge focus on Kabuli tikka. I mean, I think some of the nicest dishes there are, they're obviously their pulao, but also their vegetarian dishes. I love eggplant, bangan, in all its variations. Um, Gorgeous dishes with eggplant, with pumpkin, a lot of use of yogurt, which I love. So I think that has added so much texture and richness to, you know, what would have otherwise been a very boring culinary landscape in my hometown. One thing though, and I think part of it is I'm still I'm very far from achieving that mission, but one of those things that I wanted as a food writer and food blogger is that while I get you can get glimpses of different ethnic and regional food cultures through restaurants. The problem is so much of the best food is cooked inside people's homes. And what's happened now is that, including with Pakistani food, like Pakistani food is associated with barbecue, but we all know that Pakistani food is so much richer. Similarly, Pashtun food is just people are like, oh, chapli kebabs, barbecue, shinwari tikka. But again, there is so much more diversity to Pashtun food. And when you start talking to people, not exactly in Islamabad, but maybe in Peshawar, and you start talking about the different variations and richness of the different type of food they cook at home, is something that it's not written about. It's not something that is even talked about on television. I think that food culture in Pakistan is very monopolized by either Punjabi or Urdu speaking, or migrants from places like Delhi or UP. Um, and when I talk to my Indian friends, I think I hear some of the same sentiments about how when you talk about Indian food, especially overseas, people just are fixated on North Indian food when India is huge and with so many um, diverse food cultures. So interestingly, I'm actually married to a Bengali. He's Bengali American, and his family is from Calcutta. And I visited India for the first time in 2018. Sadly, I didn't go to Delhi. I went to Bombay, which I loved, Mumbai, and then I went to Calcutta. And Calcutta was amazing, and I was wondering about why I hadn't heard of Bengali food. I mean, there's all these stereotypes about Bengali food, but again, just the sort of the richness of Bengali cuisine isn't captured at all in sort of the food media that I'm exposed to. I'll take a quick second, and I'm going to go check on the onions. So what I'm going to do is, the onions are far from getting done, but in the interest of time, since I don't have a ton of time, we're going to try to speed this up a little bit. Is ideally, I think many of you have made pulao, so you know that the browning of onions is the most important part. You don't want them to get burnt because otherwise it leaves a really bitter taste. But if you don't color them sufficiently, it can lead to like a flavorless broth. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little flavorless. That's going to lack a little bit of color, but that's okay. Ideally, you should let them brown like on low heat for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to add some lasan adrak, about a teaspoon, before adding the whole masala. So we'll go ahead and add this whole masala. So this is my mother's recipe, just FYI. Let's see, camera, where are you? All right, so I don't know if you can see this. Sorry, I'm really clumsy with this. First time I'm actually shooting on a laptop. So we have safed zira, we have kali elaichi, we have peppercorn and cloves. I've added about one black cardamom, about a teaspoon of cumin seeds for about 1.5 cups of rice. About 4 cloves, 8 peppercorns. I'm going to go ahead and add that and saute it really quick. So you kind of fried the peppercorn, the whole masala till it was about aromatic. I'm going to go ahead and add these chickpeas, these chole. I've been living abroad for so long that I actually don't even ever boil my chole anymore. I just get them out of a can, so it's about 14 ounce. It's about 1 can's worth. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to stir fry it really quick and add some salt and some turmeric powder. So just to recap what I did a lot of quick steps there. So I went ahead and fried the whole masala. I added the chickpeas, and then I added rice, and then about 4 cups of water. Yes, 4 cups of water. So ideally, you want to like for 2 cups of rice, you add double the amount of water. I'm gonna let it bring to a boil. I'm gonna bring it to a boil, and then lower the heat and wait till the water boils out before putting it on them. So I know Anubhav wanted me to leave some time for questions. Um, if you have any questions for me, let me know while we wait for that. I don't know if the rice, the pulao is going to be ready. Sorry about that, but I thought I'd be able to speed it up a little bit. But I'll tell you a little bit about my story post Islamabad. So it's been an interesting journey. I kind of moved to the U.S. for graduate school in 2008. I was in Cornell for a couple of years before moving to Washington D.C. And so I lived in D.C. for about 7 to 8 years, and then my husband Satarshi got into the Foreign Service. So we've been in the service for almost 4 years, which is crazy. And we were first posted in Juarez, Mexico. So Juarez, for those of you who not know it, is in northern Mexico. It was hit really hard by gang violence for several years. Luckily, while we were there, it had become a lot safer, but it definitely is still on the edge. So we were in Juarez for a couple of years, and then we moved to Cambodia about exactly a year ago. So it's been really interesting. We've been lucky that Cambodia surprisingly hasn't been hit hard by COVID. So I know South Asia is seeing an exponential rise in cases, and we've all heard the stories from the United States. So feel very fortunate that things are quite quiet here. It's always been interesting to sort of talk about Pakistani food and these different cultures and sort of find the similarities. And it's again different set of similarities. Like it was amazing to see how the parallels of subcontinent food with Mexican food, and how there were so many things that were interesting about it, like the way they make their tortillas is so similar to how we make our chapatis, and just what the variations might be. And again, over here, it's fascinating to see how much of Cambodian history and culture is influenced by Eastern India. So if you go to Angkor Wat, it's some of the motifs, the gods, the symbols. It's derives so much from Hindu mythology, and so it's been interesting. It's always really fascinating for me to see sort of how these different cultures intermingle. So still, it's going to be a long way before it gets done, but I think I'll quickly walk over the steps. So once the water boils out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it with a lid. I know some people are more serious about their than I am. So you want a really tight-fitting lid, and then I'm going to tightly wrap a cloth around it and just let it steam. So, some people just turn the heat off and let it steam. I just keep the burner on at the lowest possible point. And I'd sort of just let the rice steam for about 10 minutes, and you want to immediately fluff it once it's done. And then you can have it with some sort of raita, and I've actually grown to really love a lot of the Southeast Asian condiments, so I always enjoy having it with that. If there are no more questions, I will be signing out. If you want to learn, follow sort of my journey as a food writer and food blogger, I am all types of social media. You can follow me on Instagram at Pakistan Eats, on Twitter, as well as Facebook. And my blog's address is pakistaneats.com. Love to hear your comments. Like I said, I have strong roots in India, and it's always a pleasure to connect with people from across the border. So thank you, Anubhav, once again. I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you guys.